Welcome to the Move 101 podcast. In this week's episode, we sat down with Dr. Kelly Pritchett to learn nutritional strategies and practices across the family lifespan. Dr. Pritchett is a board-certified specialist in sports dietetics and an associate professor in nutrition and exercise science at Central Washington University, where she also acts as the director of sports nutrition. Her research and clinical work focus around pre- and post-exercise nutrition, energy availability in athletes, thermoregulation, and disordered eating. She's also a triathlete, a wife and mother of 3 active boys, and a passionate alumna of the University of Alabama. Dr. Pritchett provided us an excellent look at how we can help develop a healthy relationship with food in ourselves and our kids, and the importance of getting the family involved in meals, dealing with picky eaters, as well as some particular eating strategies that we can employ for kids at various stages of their athletic development. We hope you find the conversation valuable, and as always, thanks for listening. Dr. Kelly Pritchett, thank you so much for joining us on the Move 101 podcast, and welcome. We're glad you're here.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. We are excited to talk nutrition with you and kind of approach this from hopefully a lifespan, kind of for the family, across the family lifespan, and get some insights from you and some wisdom both as a mom and a professional in the field. And so we're just excited to jump in. So kind of to kick things off here, I'm curious if you have any kind of broadly speaking, any nutrition fundamentals that you can kind of speak to as far as, are there things that you found apply to both kids and parents across the lifespan?
Yeah, definitely. I'd say keep it simple. I like to think about a plate when I'm, working with clients or even talking to kids, and your plate should have color and protein and carbs. So just simple. Also, too, I think, paying attention to your hunger and satiety cues. And I think that's the thing about kids, is they're pretty good if we let them figure it out on their own.
Yeah, that brings up immediately, as you mentioned, kids and kind of like regulating how much to eat and whatnot. What are some strategies? For example, let's say you have parents that are trying to integrate this new eating style, right? Maybe they followed the standard American diet and just wasn't working for them, and they're trying to make some of these changes, add more colors to their plate, and you get pushback from kids. What are some maybe strategies or thoughts for, I'm full, but if you put ice cream in front of them, they magically aren't full anymore. So how do you kind of work through that, or what strategies do you have for parents to have some resilience and, say, hey, this is healthy, and teaching them that, the parent teaching the kid, but then also just strategies for mixing that stuff in?
Yeah. So first of all, I would say be patient and flexible. I think those are really, really easier said than done, right? As parents, but I recommend every parent buy the Ellen Satter book. I don't know if you've ever heard of it, but she is the dietitian guru on child feeding. And the name of the book is Child of Mine. And she talks about this division of responsibility where the parents provide the food and the time. So I'm going to provide 3 meals a day and 2 snacks for my kids, and I decide when and what I'm going to provide. And then you let the child decide if and how much they're going to eat. So it's a hard thing to implement, but I think the more you do it, the easier it gets. When it comes to something like vegetables, keep offering that food, keep putting it on their plate. Don't have an argument with, I try not to bring attention to it. I think that's another thing. Like, I'm looking at the plate and I'm like, oh my gosh, eat your broccoli, but keep offering it. And eventually they'll eat it, they'll try it. And the other strategy, because I do have a middle child who's pretty picky, and that's been challenging, but what I do with him is I just make sure that there's one thing on their plate that I know they'll eat. And so if that's, I have to bring out a piece of toast or something like that.
That's okay. So that's interesting that you mentioned the Ellen Satter book. I wasn't aware of that particular book, but the approach is one that I actually heard very recently. Our youngest has some food allergies, and we took him, he had food allergies and eczema, and we took him last year to National Jewish Hospital in Denver, which is one of the big spots for research on both eczema and food allergies and asthma and things like that. And got his eczema cleared up and found some great help with some of those food allergies. We just
Good.
took him back actually like 2 weeks ago to do a few additional tests for other food allergies and kind of are there other foods as he ages and grows that we can kind of check off or start introducing in his diet. And that was actually one of the approaches that they recommended from their nutrition team was, I think, a very similar idea of they suggested providing 2 foods on the plate, like 2 options that the child can kind of pick from and sit down in a chair or the high chair for 20 minutes. Is that a kind of a similar approach of, you mentioned having a specific time and providing the food and then allow the child to have some autonomy in what they're selecting and how much they're eating?
Yeah, totally. And I don't know how you were raised as kids, but I was made to sit there and finish my plate. And that's not the train of thought now, which is really hard as a parent, because I think those things are ingrained in us and we don't want to waste food either. But I think that those skills transfer over, like you're talking about autonomy, into adulthood and being able to stop, being able to regulate when I'm full, and being able to listen to those cues.
It seems like a more natural kind of, like, as you said, like a skill that you can build on as the child then grows. And one of the things that I was thinking of kind of coming into this conversation is how do we give kids those skills to start making better choices, especially as they get into the teen years where there's going to be peer pressure and there's, Levi mentioned the standard American diet, which we know is pretty terrible, right? And so we want to start providing these skills for our kids to make better choices. Is that, do you have other suggestions there that maybe are in the same line or same vein?
Yeah, I would say don't be afraid to get in the kitchen with them and do some cooking and, just teach them, I guess, at least I would say all of my kids enjoy like hanging out in the kitchen. And it might be messy, right? But it's so much fun and there's good memories. And I think you're teaching them a love for food and, to enjoy. I think, another thing, it's important to enjoy food. I think we've lost that in society, but yeah.
Not to get too off the rails here, but do you think that we've lost some of that appreciation because what is it, more than 70% of our food comes from ultra processed, or what is it, about 70% of our food is ultra processed? Does that take away some of the experience, like you said, getting comfortable or inviting them into the kitchen? I know that like my mom cooked from scratch, but she didn't necessarily invite us in, and she didn't say you're not allowed in here, but she didn't bring us into that. But I know that's something that we've been very intentional with the kids, not forcing them to do it, but also at times, even when they seem like they'd be on the fence of whether they want to do that or something else, we've said, hey, can you help us measure the flour or measure the rice or whatever? What are maybe some strategies to get parents to kind of get out of the maybe perhaps using more processed foods and into more of a whole food, and then developing some of that confidence when they work with their kids in the kitchen as well?
Yeah, I think giving them a task is nice. Like if I say to my youngest, you're going to make the salad, and he gets really excited about that. I think why we have gone to more processed food is because it's quicker too. I mean, if you think about it, like parents are eating out more, or families are eating out more. They're not sitting down at a table and eating together. And so I think you're right. We've lost all of that, but you can actually involve the kids and get things done quicker. Teaching them how to cut bell peppers or teaching them how to chop vegetables. I mean, you have to be careful, but those are important skills. And like you said, teaching them to use whole foods or ingredients that come from the earth versus being processed, which everything is slightly processed.
For sure.
I guess if we would argue
right.
that.
Yeah. So I mean, go ahead, Andrew.
I was just gonna say, do you kind of pair that, Kelly, with some of the the practice, right, of preparing food at home? Do you pair that at all with not necessarily teaching as in a lecture style, but teaching your kids some of those fundamentals? What are some of the things that you're telling them as you prepare food together?
Yeah, I mean, just showing them like different spices and flavors, like ways that you can enhance flavor from herbs and spices and garlic and things like that. What else? I'm trying to think. Well, it also too doesn't have to be complicated. So, I will buy bags of frozen veggies just because there are those nights when we get home at what,
Mm-hmm.
7:45, and I'm like, I gotta make something. So,
Mm-hmm.
we rely on those sort of things for quick and simple dinners. And I think too, when you think of like your kids going off to college, especially males, um, I hope that they leave my house and they, at least have 5 meals that they know how to cook,
Mm-hmm.
that
Mm-hmm.
type of thing.
Yeah.
I think I had one, and I just used that over and over.
Yeah. Yep. Yep.
My roommates got real tired of that one, but I
Yeah.
agree. I think that's a skill I've got some time, so maybe a decade
Yeah.
or so,
Mm-hmm.
until my
Mhm.
kids are nearing that age. But that's something that I think of as, boy, what a cool thing to be able to pass on to them, so that when they
Yep.
get to that point, they're
Mhm.
way ahead of the game in terms of, hey, I've got some ownership. That's kind of the sense that I'm getting here of what we can
Yep.
provide them is the ownership and understanding of how to have that relationship
Mhm.
with food that they're mentioning, which sounds so much healthier in many ways
Mhm.
than kind of the
Mhm.
standard American approach, where we've talked about this idea of, ultra processed food, but also just, I think of the busyness. That's, I think,
Mm-hmm.
one of the reasons that we get away from family time in the kitchen is because we have so many things going on. And if
Mhm.
that's something we say we want, i.e. reducing processed foods, because we know that the health consequences are there, it takes some
Mhm.
pretty intentional steps to create that time as a family. But boy, what a
Mhm.
cool reward there is if you're able to do that. Are there strategies that you can recommend, or I mean, is it just setting aside the time, or just kind of talking through that as a family and saying,
Yeah.
kind of involving the kids in the decision making there?
Yeah, I mean, there's some definitely planning that goes into it. And, I tell people at all stages of life that, if you want to be intentional with nutrition, whether you're an athlete or you're an adult, it requires planning. And that planning will take you a little bit extra time, but it's so worth it. And
Mm-hmm.
in terms of strategies, yeah, I mean, I try to think about at least the weekdays and plan those out ahead of time. I'm not super like organized with it, to be honest with you, but I'll try to like cook things that I can use 2 nights in a row. So we rely on the Instant Pot a lot for like rice, and I make enough to last us for 2 nights and some lunches. Um, Cooking chicken in the crock pot, things like that will last, a few nights. I could do like a Buddha bowl one night, and the next night we could do tacos with it. So
Mm-hmm.
it's not complicated, but it's things that you can use for 2 or 3 meals throughout the week.
Mm-hmm.
Are you able to then kind of translate that into some kid meals, perhaps, that's one of the challenges I certainly face in thinking through this nutritional journey with kids is, all right, our oldest at least is going off to school. He's in kindergarten this year, and preparing, my wife thankfully prepares his lunches, but that's something we think about is all right, what's he going to eat? And B, can we make this easy, but also
Mm-hmm.
healthy? Are you doing
Yeah.
leftovers? Are there other things that you're kind of aiming for with kid meals at school?
With kid meals at school, like making their lunches, or
Yeah,
are you
just in
talking
terms
about?
of like what does a kid lunch typically look like, and are there perhaps similar strategies for making it easier to prepare those?
So I let my kids do that
Okay,
with
great.
some oversight. And I mean, there are some times where they rebel, but and I'm like, okay, I'll make your sandwich if you do the rest. And
Mm-hmm.
so the way we typically do that, it's either peanut butter and jelly, or they'll have cheese and turkey sandwich, and they get tired of peanut butter and jelly. But um and I always put a fruit or a veggie in their lunch, and then I let them choose one item. So again, it gives them some autonomy in terms of, right now they're taking 2 or 3 pieces of Halloween candy.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah. You got to get it out of the house somehow. I mean, you gotta
exactly.
slowly trickle that into the day,
That wasn't a laugh of judgment, by the way. That was a laugh
Yeah.
No,
of
it's okay.
hey, we're there
Us too.
too.
Yeah. Yeah.
No judgment here
Yeah.
either.
Yeah. So, go ahead. Go ahead.
Oh,
No,
yeah,
just
go ahead.
Go ahead, Kelly. Go ahead.
Oh, I was just gonna say the Halloween candy could be a whole nother topic.
Yeah, I
And
know.
I have no
Seriously.
judgment in terms of what parents want to do there,
Mm-hmm.
but it loses the novelty. I think that's the
Sure.
main thing. If you don't make a big deal of it, they forget about it in a week.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah. Yeah, I think a lot of what I'm hearing is, we're in a place right now where it seems like in general, the three of us here having this conversation have a pretty good understanding and idea
Mm,
of eating healthy and what healthy is. Because, I know previously when I worked in a gym setting, people would say, "Oh, I eat healthy." And I go, "Okay, what do you eat?" And then you start hearing it and you go, "All right, let's have a conversation." So I think the reason why I say that is we're all assuming here and would agree in general that Whole Foods is the great
mhm,
place to start and this and that, and so we're able to pass these skills down to our kids. What do you do when you're working with folks that are just older adults, maybe not even parents yet, but how do you begin to get into that psychological piece of nutrition? This is something that I always try to ask anyone in the nutrition space, because and I use the same example every time, which is, and Andrew could probably repeat it for me, it's we all have the ability to pick up a food and then put it to our mouth. So to
mhm,
me, it's not a
mhm,
physical thing, it's a
mhm.
psychological thing that may drive our physical behavior. So if you're a parent that doesn't have the tools maybe that we have, how do you encourage someone mentally to get along this path and then to stay the course once they go, "Hey, I lost 30 pounds," or "I feel way better," or "I'm
Mhm.
sleeping better," or whatever that is? How do you even get people there? Like I said, we're fortunate enough to be there and
Yeah,
continue to refine and work on
exactly.
it. How do you get people to this place?
A lot of education, and then it's really like, an assessment with the individual. So if I'm working with a client individually, we'd start with an assessment, and a lot of that's just seeing where they are currently. And, especially moms, what I tend to find is they don't eat enough.
Hmm.
And it's like sporadic throughout the day. So they're not having three wholesome meals that are, nutrient dense. So it's just teaching them those concepts on, like, going back to childhood almost and
Hmm.
saying, "Are you hungry?" Like, teaching them hunger and satiety cues and being able to listen to that. So, oftentimes it's eating more and on a schedule. So listening to, not only um, your physiological hunger as well as, like, hunger, your biological hunger.
Hmm.
So knowing that, hey, I need to eat because I'm going to CrossFit at 5 p.m. and I don't want to
Hmm.
feel like crap. So, you know, it's it's a lot of education. It's crazy some of the behaviors and patterns that have become ingrained in a lot of people who are busy.
Hmm. So would you say it's more important as people start to become aware and as we begin educating, is it the aim to make sure that people are eating enough? So maybe more of a caloric approach, so to make sure they're either eating enough or that they're not eating too much, and then
Mhm.
begin to worry about the discussion of quality.
Yep.
So yeah, can you take us through that process? So when you're doing this assessment with someone, you got
Mhm.
someone that comes in, they're 20 pounds, 30 pounds overweight. They're both parents work full time. They don't have a background or a history or good example of what eating healthy was. Maybe they grew up like my dad on the East Coast and they use canned vegetables all the time, and that was like fresh to them.
Mhm.
How do you kind of get them to that stage of the quantity or quality first, and then integrating those practices?
Yeah, so yeah, it's behavior change, right? So, and we're not going to change it all overnight. So
For
I
sure.
look at their current diet, and I'm not a fan of, like, calorie tracking, on to be honest, but it could require some of that initially,
Mhm.
um, just to get them to realize how much they're eating or not eating. So sometimes that can be beneficial to track for a little while. I just don't want anyone becoming super obsessive about it, right? And then it's behaviors. So let's focus on two or three things that you feel 90% confident that you can implement. So maybe it's adding an extra veggie, maybe it's drinking more water, whatever that looks like. But I just make sure that the client is confident and on, because if I told them what to do and they're like, yeah, I'm not going to do that,
Mhm,
when we
mhm,
get off, um, then I haven't done a good job, in my opinion.
mhm.
So where are they in their readiness to change,
Yeah.
which is important.
Mhm. So
One of the things I kind of think through that process of when I've
Mhm.
worked on this for myself, one of the challenges if you're in a kind of a busy work environment, you're on the go a lot, is
Mhm.
snacking or even just kind of food storage. Meal prep is one of the things that I've used ahead of time that can help. You talked about planning already.
Mhm.
Where does snacking fit into that? And are there some healthier options that you provide people in that education space of, hey, maybe choose this instead of this?
Yeah, definitely. I think the snacking component you can plan ahead of time. I always suggest keeping some things in your office that are healthy. So nuts. The problem with nuts though is like, if we're just sitting there eating mindlessly,
Mhm.
that can be a problem. So maybe it's pre-packaging them out or um, like preparing snacks ahead of time for the week. Maybe it's breakfast that you're struggling with, and so you could make overnight oats for 5 mornings, and that tends to be a tough one for a lot of people that are on the go.
Hmm.
But with snacks, just the basic concept of you're pairing a carb with a protein, and so thinking about some of those items. A lot of times I'll use things like yogurt, Greek yogurt, cottage cheese as the protein, and then it's maybe an apple or banana. So again, it doesn't have to be complicated.
Mhm.
Keep it
So
colorful.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Now, speaking of that and speaking of snacks, something that I always go back and forth with my sister. She's like a eat
Mhm.
20 small meals a day kind of gal. And I say this jokingly, of course, but
Mhm.
so she finds more success when she's eating more frequently. And I realize there's some individuality here as well. But is there something to perhaps fasting from food or not eating a snack to avoid eating something unhealthy? Like, for example, you kind of been on the run all day long and you're a
Mhm.
mom and you haven't been getting the calories in that, maybe you tend to under eat. And so you're
Mhm.
like, oh, I need a snack. Would it be better to eat a Snickers bar to hold you over for an hour and a half, 2 hours, or a kind bar, or a Cliff bar, whatever, where
Mhm.
there's maybe it's not the most healthiest choice ever. Is it better to avoid eating that snack, knowing that you will have food in a couple hours, right? Where it's 2022, like we're
Mhm.
not we're not in a food shortage where we don't know when our next meal is coming. Most people know when that's
Right.
happening.
Yeah.
So is there something to perhaps fasting for that instance and then realizing to yourself, hey, maybe I should plan better next time, or where do you kind of land on that?
So and I think that there's probably some different opinions here. I'm gonna say if you're hungry,
Hmm.
go ahead and eat the snack. If you're
Hmm.
not hungry, okay, that's fine. But what tends to happen if I disregard that hunger cue and I say, okay, I'm gonna wait
Hmm.
until dinner, what happens at dinner? I tend to overeat or
Hmm.
eat till I'm like more than full. So I would say you've got to listen to your body in that situation.
Hmm.
So
And yeah, and so for example, say not I'm not trying to pin you down to anything
no,
here,
it's
by the way. I
okay.
just because it's one that I wrestle with, right? Where it's like I do know that I need a snack or that I need
Hmm.
calories in order to function well. But I do know that I've also made poor snack decisions and then felt more tired after that because sometimes my energy goes straight up and then it goes straight down. And then I don't
Hmm.
really get that effect that I was kind of hoping for. So
Hmm.
I guess the question is more specific to if it's a healthy snack, we probably all could agree that yeah, go for the snack. Um,
Yeah.
but like you mentioned earlier too, some people will kind of go, "Oh, I'm hungry," and it's more of a mindless eating rather than I'm actually hungry. So, how do you help people key into I'm bored and want to eat versus
And
I need something right now to sustain me?
that could be journaling. I mean, they
Mm,
could journal like, okay, what am I feeling in this moment? Am I emotional or am I stressed? So I think that's again, we've lost touch with hunger and satiety cues. And that
mhm,
is my issue with fasting. I do think that it can, and I know that there's some research that supports it, but I do think we lose touch of hunger, satiety cues, could potentially trigger some disordered eating with people.
mm,
Um, but I guess on the flip side too, I do not think that everyone has to eat snacks. You can subsist off of 3 meals a day. So no, a
Mhm.
snack is not necessary. So I don't know if that answers your question. I think you just need to figure out what works best for you. And you'll have to forgive me because I'm used to working with athletes. So I'm
Yeah,
always
sure.
telling them you need to
Eat
fuel.
more. Yeah, 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 for
Yeah.
sure. Totally. And
So
that's, I think, like you're saying, it's kind of a know thyself. If you're someone that's not burning a
yeah.
bunch of calories, then you don't need to eat like 10 meals a day, including snacks and all that stuff. But if
Yeah.
you're an athlete, like you said, where you're burning an extra couple thousand calories a day because of your activity, then
Mhm.
yeah, for sure, you need to make sure you got the fuel for it.
Right.
I think
Yeah.
that's a perfect segue into kind of circling back to, let's say, maybe adolescents and teens, as we kind of circle through this or cycle through this family lifelong journey with
Mhm.
nutrition. As kids get into that phase of maybe more competitive sports, I know your boys are starting to get into that realm with some triathlons and things like that that I've spied on via social media. But
Yeah.
what are some of those? Again, we're talking strategies and things for that kind of adolescent or teen athlete whose macro and micronutrient needs
Yep.
go up. Are there some things to be on the lookout for, especially, or things to be planning ahead more so than just kind of your normal, not sedentary, but your normal child?
Mhm.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's, of course, the 3 meals a day and aiming for, again, the same plate approach would apply with the color, some carbs and protein at meals. It could be that they need more carbs because they're getting into sports, and they're like, I can say my 11-year-old, he swims and he plays soccer, and some days like he'll go from swim practice to soccer. And so,
Mhm.
in that situation, I'm like making sure he's got a snack before and then in between the two practices. So um, you might have to shop at Costco.
Yeah.
That Costco membership for
Yeah,
sure.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
Are,
because it
are,
gets
are there any favorite snacks that you guys have? Because I mean, those are high
uh,
caloric expenditure
Mhm.
events.
Events, yeah, yeah.
yeah.
So like the density is almost an important one there. Are there some
Mhm.
favorite snacks you guys have?
Granola bars and fig bars. I tend to
Mm.
keep like the big box of both of those in the car. And again, you've got mostly simple carbs in those snacks, which is what you need if we're talking about pre-exercise and immediately after. The other thing would be graham crackers. I feel like those are just simple, pretty easily
Mhm.
digested. They can eat them 15 minutes before they go into practice.
Mm.
And who
So
doesn't like a gram? I mean,
I
you know,
know, right?
yeah, yeah.
So
What are your
good.
thoughts on protein intake for kids? Are you aiming for a certain number, kind of ballparkish, or is it more so maybe a portion size, trying to get those
Mm.
big 3 meals a day, and then let the snacks and other things fill in where needed?
Yeah, so that's a good question. No, I don't tend to focus on numbers yet, not yet. If I have like a 15-year-old football player that I'm working with, then we would do some education around that. Believe it or not, I've done just this past year a lot of consults with high school, like football or baseball players. So a lot of what we did is looking at their protein needs and then paring that down into meals and snacks. But currently with like younger kids, I just try to focus on the 3 meals and make sure that they're getting protein at each meal, and then if they can get it in a snack, that's an extra bonus.
Mm.
Mhm.
I've noticed you've mentioned a couple times protein and carbohydrate, and I haven't heard fat yet, but I'm kind of curious. Is your approach saying, hey, if we get a whole food protein source, there's fat coming along with that, and so it
Tip-
takes care of itself typically? Is that kind of the approach?
Typically,
Yeah.
yeah, typically. And I guess I'm thinking too, if someone's going to practice, they've got practice an hour later, we don't want a whole lot of fat. Just because
Could you
once it, my
explain that
gut.
for the listener?
Say that again.
Could you explain why? I understand kind of where you're coming from
Yeah,
with that, but for the educational piece, I'd be curious
for
to
sh- for sure.
hear your
Yeah.
thoughts. Yeah.
So typically things that are, higher in fat are going to take longer to digest. And so if your teenager is going to basketball practice, for example, you don't want the gut trying to digest that. So that's why, some of the snacks that I mentioned are more on the simple carb side of
Mhm.
things. And I'm not suggesting that be the majority of the day. That's around exercise. So I feel
Mhm.
like there's a kind of different concepts. The majority of the diet, breakfast, lunch, and dinner, should be whole grains, complex carbohydrates. And then if we're talking about during, which is a whole nother topic, and then post exercise, that's where those simple carbs and maybe a little bit of protein can be beneficial.
What age would you say some of that stuff matters? Like we all have kids that are somewhere in the same age range. I got an 8-year-old that's playing soccer right now, and I'm not there giving him a main line of some orange juice right before he gets out there to get him ready for the game or whatever. But when would you say that's something for parents to key into? And to be clear, not to obsess over, not to make it so militant that the kid is forced to do all this stuff or whatever, but when should a parent kind of key into that time frame? Prepubescent, during puberty, post, etc.?
Yeah, I would say look at their activity level first of all. I mean, are they playing one sport and they're going to practice for 45 minutes a day? It's probably not as big of a concern. But like I mentioned with my oldest, and actually my 9-year-old, there's some days they'll be doing two sports. And so I feel like it's just super important that those days to pay more attention. So I guess to answer your question, probably middle school, start paying attention, and then maybe high school athlete would need to really pay attention to say protein. I mean, are they growing normally? Things like that. If they're not, then maybe they do need something else in their diet.
Yeah.
Are you looking at anything? I mean, I don't want to get too granular with, hey, like, we probably don't need to do blood tests on the middle school athlete, but as far as micronutrients, that's kind of where I'm going. Are there things that you're looking at to see if maybe a middle school or high school athlete needs some more micros, or maybe is that taken care of if you're focusing on a whole food approach?
It should be if the diet is balanced, but I would say calcium is one that I tend to look at. Like, do they eat dairy or not? Are they vegan? Things like that. So calcium and iron are probably the two big ones. Especially a female athlete who's just started her menstrual cycle and she's maybe an endurance athlete, then I'm going to be more keyed in on iron, as well as calcium. I think calcium. Vitamin D is also another, I guess, topic too. But I don't typically recommend vitamin D unless they've had a blood test done. So typically I don't do much with that until college athletes.
Speaking of iron, real quick, of iron, my wife was told when she was pregnant, like cooking out of a cast iron pan is one way to get that. How much, this is, again, not to get off the rails here, but how much, is there any support in that, or how much iron do you actually get from cooking from a cast iron?
Yeah, there is. The food actually leaches or absorbs some of the iron from the cast iron pot. And off the top of my head, I hate to quote a number, but I want to say it's like 6 to 10 milligrams. It's somewhere in that range. So you are picking up a decent amount, especially if let's say you're making a chili, for example, and it's got tomatoes in it. So you've got that ascorbic acid, which is going to help with the absorption of iron. So I feel like that's just a great meal for someone who's trying to get more iron in their diet.
Cool. Good to know.
Yeah. One of the things I want to jump into here is again, in the teen years, we do see, the tendency of that relationship with food, depending on a lot of different factors. And this may be a tough question to answer, but disordered eating is kind of the thing I'm kind of getting to here is, for parents, what are some things to be watching out for or be aware of to maintain that good relationship with food with our kids? That's something that, it's a tragic thing that happens sometimes, but we see the various different kinds of nutrition disorders that happen in those teen years. Are there things to look out for? Are there, of course, referring out as needed to professionals, et cetera, but what do you look for in those years?
Yeah, definitely. This is something that I'm glad you brought up, because I do, it's something I'm passionate about, and it's something that I feel like super important. I think one thing is parents, kind of maybe off topic a little bit, but just I think it's important that we model good behavior, and there's no like diet or fat shaming talk. Like I feel like if you think about, you've probably heard parents before. I don't know. I have like been around some of this talk where the mom is always on the diet, that type of thing. And I think the kids pick up on that. And so I think we need to be really careful. Like it's okay for someone to want to lose weight, but just be careful that like what you're saying and about food around your kids. And so I think besides that, like be aware, because the onset of eating disorders tends to coincide with puberty, especially in females, but males are not immune either. Look for signs. Like I think if there's weight loss, and that's not always the case, because we could have someone with bulimia, but they're not eating, or more picky around food, and oftentimes this can be hidden, but just pay attention to some of these things. And I would say also too, referring to a dietitian and a physician and a psychologist. So it's definitely a multidisciplinary approach when it comes to treating it. And the earlier you get help, the more likely the person is to recover from an eating disorder. And I have lots of thoughts around this. Also too, like just being there, be supportive. As I think it's a hard thing as a parent to watch your child go through. And the best thing that I think a parent can do is like be the parent, be supportive, be loving, versus the focus on what they're not eating. Like I feel like that's where the professional comes in, and let the professional do their job. I hope that makes sense.
Oh yeah. I think as I think through that, it seems like one of the biggest challenges would be that decision of when do we, if you don't know what signs you're looking for, perhaps it seems like it'd be very easy for things to get too far.
Right.
Are there some, you mentioned weight loss. Are there some other things to be aware of or watching for, so that almost like a telltale of, hey, we need a professional or a team of professionals, as you mentioned, to be involved here?
Yeah. Not eating. I think not eating in a social situation, maybe super concerned with their weight or their body. What else? I'm trying to think. I mean, there's like obvious signs if you notice binging and purging, that type of thing, but it's things to be aware of. Maybe talk as well. I think have open conversations with your kids and encourage them to talk to you about these things. But I think you can typically see it in their eating patterns. You would notice it.
Is there something to, for example, distance athletes and wanting to keep weight down, as well as like, so they're not packing out as much weight when they're running these long distances or things like triathlons and otherwise, but then also aesthetic sports too, where they're required to look and be a certain way, dance, synchronized swimming, gymnastics, and these types of things. Is it harder to kind of identify some of that stuff because that's almost the nature of the sport? And if so, what are maybe some additional steps to take for parents that do have athletes in these realms?
Yeah, definitely the aesthetic sports, like you mentioned, diving and gymnastics, and anything where weight is a factor. Maybe it's rowing or wrestling.
Men's wrestling, yeah.
Yeah, I think, are they fatigued? Are they having difficulty concentrating at school? So it might not just exhibit from a weight loss standpoint. Like there are other things, poor recovery. So there's a lot of things you can look at from an athletic performance standpoint, as well as the endurance athlete who thinks, lighter is better, and that's not necessarily the case. What was your question again?
So for example, like if my son or daughter doesn't play sports and they're preoccupied with their weight, then that would be kind of like an easy marker for concern. Whereas if my son is a wrestler or my daughter's a synchronized swimmer and they make comment about that, it may kind of go over my head a little bit easier. So are there any kind of additional, maybe deeper steps that you would take some of those things?
Yeah, I think that's where you would dig a little deeper with the kid, and what do you mean by that? And just, again, try to have an open-ended conversation. And if they're not fueling, their needs are going to be greater than a sedentary, it's a sedentary teenager. So, what does that look like? Are they avoiding things? Are they restricting? And if they are, I think that's concerning as well. The problem with it is, you as the parent say, I'm going to take you to a dietitian, or I'm going to take you to a doctor, and they are not on board with that. That's where it's difficult.
Right.
But because they are still in your house, I feel like, we have the responsibility in that case.
Well, it really speaks back to this importance of that family relationship with food, and how it kind of getting the whole family involved in, whether it's preparation or even just the discussion of food, and kind of that developing that culture within your household of how do we relate to food, speaks to that quite a bit. I also think about, again, going back to the idea of busyness. When we're busy, we don't have a lot of that same time, or we're not checking in. We just had our 6-year-old just had to have some cavities replaced because we hadn't done the appropriate, not enough brushing and flossing and things. And it's easy to let some of that stuff accidentally. I mean, we all mean well. We want the best for our kids, but stuff like that happens. And so, boy, it's a great reminder, I think, to continually be developing those relationships, spending the time with our kids to cultivate that in them. So, and
I also would say, I think you brought up a good point there. And I think this is what happens when kids are in high school. And I think, like, maybe Levi, this is what you're alluding to, is that, those family meals where we sit down at night and have dinner, I feel like those are non-existent when the kids get older. And so I think making that non-negotiable as much as possible, meaning that we're going to have these dinners 4 nights a week, or that would give you a good, some good insight in terms of how your child's doing from a eating standpoint.
Yeah, I think it's so hard to, and we won't go down this road, but to at least acknowledge it, which is both parents working, kids going to school full time, having homework, having a social life, playing multiple sports, and then to get everyone around the table at 5 o'clock at night is, and I like what you're saying is absolutely true. But then when we look at reality, it's like, that's not the priority anymore. And again, not going down that road because we're not going to save the world here. But I think what we can all agree on is at least 1 meal a week, 2 meals a week, whenever it's realistic for you to do that, to sit down and have a meal. And if it's not realistic, at least twice a week, it might be time to reevaluate, because now we're looking at this then to me is almost like the preventative measure. If you don't have the time for that and you can't do that, I think there's going to be some bigger problems at hand in the moment, as well as potentially in the future.
Yeah, I totally agree.
I mean, it's very much kind of that behavior change model. It's like start where you can, right? Maybe like you said, Levi, maybe it's 1 or 2 meals, work from there. You don't have to have every single meal, making a drastic change. But boy, I think we're all in agreement that that's a very important piece. So
definitely,
and setting that tone early and often. I know that athletics can be a huge, it can be a great help for kids, but it can also be a wedge at times too, both in parents going different ways, taking one kid this way, one kid the other way, and all the above. So I don't want to, I'm not ready to tackle that yet.
I know.
But what I would ask though is post athletics. This is kind of more of a selfish question. Played college sports, and in college you can eat whatever you want, drink whatever you want, do whatever you want. And then you stop playing the sports and all of a sudden you got 20 pounds on you or whatever. What are some, aside from not being a fool, what are some maybe strategies or things that you can share with folks post athletics? Whether that, and I see that a lot of times in high school too, where, we've all gone to our 10-year reunion and you see someone, you go, whoa, didn't recognize you, but they were, the stud athlete or whatever. So what are maybe some strategies post career that people should consider, and how do we kind of mitigate potential excess weight gain or just a lack of healthy eating?
Yeah, I think that's an important transition and can be difficult for a lot of people. I know it was hard for me as a swimmer. I mean, you go from 5 hours of training a day to like nothing. So yeah, it is hard. I would say it's super important to find something else that you enjoy doing activity wise. So making that a priority, whatever it looks like. Maybe it's CrossFit. I don't know. Maybe it's running. I don't know why I keep going to CrossFit, but you know, and then realizing that, hey, maybe I don't need the same amount of energy or calories that I did when I was, you know, a collegiate athlete. And so it could be scaling back. I also would say look at alcohol intake. Like I feel like, especially college, that tends to be a big source of like empty calories for, you know, the athlete who's transitioning out. But look at that. Added sugars as well could be another place that could be an easy cut. So, you know, it's just possibly changing the way you eat.
Yeah. Well, it's not only the booze, it's the decisions you make when you're on the booze. Like you're drinking at 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 o'clock at night. And then you're like, I'm hungry. I'm going to do the nachos and the breakfast burrito, even though it hasn't become the next day yet. And you're all of a sudden you're 5,000 calories into this thing that you just go, what just happened? You know? Whereas not to say that you should, not to say you should do that in college, but well, that actually, sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
That brings up a good question or maybe a good topic. You talked about the fourth meal of the day. Where do you kind of land on evening eating? I know for me, breakfast is dialed. It's easy. Lunch is just as easy. Dinner, we make good decisions. But then it's after dinner where I go, do I want to be bad tonight or do I want to be good? What I mean, and maybe that's we eat too early or we eat too later, or how do you kind of help people through some of that fourth meal desire or mistake, if you will?
First of all, don't think of yourself as bad or good. Okay. Say that. So stop labeling yourself or talking that way to yourself. I think that, you know, it could be you're not eating enough earlier in the day. I'm definitely an advocate of like eat a lot more at breakfast and lunch. And then dinner should almost be smaller, but I think we do the opposite, right? So, that could be why. And if you want something else before bed, like ask yourself, am I hungry? Am I bored? Like what is going on? Why do I truly want this? And I think, you know, if you truly want to have some ice cream, then you need to honor that. And I think one thing that if you restrict it, it becomes more like you want it even more. And so I think by allowing yourself to have these things when you feel like it, you can stop sooner, versus like you just mentioned, having that conversation saying, I'm so bad that I just ate whatever it was, you know? And eventually I feel like those cravings, weirdly enough, like kind of go away in a sense, and I can have a piece of dark chocolate and I'm satisfied. So nothing should be off limits, in my opinion. It's this idea of intuitive eating. I don't know if you're familiar with that. I think it works for some people and maybe others it, you know, doesn't work. But
sure. And I think that that's probably where I'm going to is, again, we're all kind of have been on this journey for decades now, whereas a lot of folks aren't there yet. So I'm also thinking about where do people go and what do people do when they're starting this experience of, hey, I know I need to make some changes. I know for me, for example, if you were to tell me however long, and I think, again, there's individuality to this stuff, but if you were to tell me, you know, 15 years ago, hey, you know what, Levi, you can have ice cream every single night. Just have 1 scoop instead of 4 scoops once a week. Oh man, that'd be like, I would go off the rails. So for someone like myself, I needed some very hard lines to go like, it's not so. So I guess I'm asking, is there room for individuality, and how have you managed some of those different personalities? Have you had to kind of put your foot down, be very black and white and create these boundaries? Whereas with other people, you can tell they need some freedom in some of this stuff.
Yeah, it's definitely individual. Nutrition it always depends, right? That's going to be my answer 9 times out of 10. But
Yeah.
I certainly think that, maybe but food rules, I feel like they don't work in the end. I mean, honestly, if you're like, I'm not eating ice cream again, like I'm not eating it, and then you're faced with this decision 2 weeks later, put right in front of you, you go crazy, versus like, I'm going to try to listen to my intuitively, like, what do I want in this moment? Do I truly want ice cream?
Yeah. Well, this is where it transcends just the calories or just the physical nature of this, I think. And it's really having, again, knowing thyself.
Yeah, totally.
And it sounds like correct me if I'm wrong, but it sounds like there is an element of having some structure or a plan around that intuitive eating, saying maybe instead of the 4 scoops, it's I'm going to allow myself to have some ice cream, but again, checking in with those hunger and satiety cues.
Yeah, and that could be, if you find that you need that structure, it could be, I'm going to use a small cup, or I'm going to use a small bowl. So sometimes it's the instrument that we're eating out of, that it could be smaller. That could be a strategy, or only buying small containers of ice cream versus big containers. It really depends on the person. You're totally right.
Yeah, what's available is always one that is either a help or a hindrance to me, right? If I have to go out of my house to go get something, that's a whole lot harder than if I have a gallon of ice cream in my freezer.
Exactly. But I think it's important to have some treats, right? Like, allow yourself.
Oh, I do too.
Yeah. Okay.
Every Friday and Saturday, in fact. Yeah.
That's my rule is weekends.
Okay.
I'm allowing myself treats on the weekends. That's a rule I've found works well for me. But kind of on that same topic, you've mentioned this kind of the intuitive eating. Are there ways to practice getting in better touch with hunger and satiety cues and recognizing those? Because if we're going to use that approach where it's more intuitive and kind of recognizing that, it seems like practicing it and having a clarity towards what those feel like and the differences between them would be important. How does one go about that practice?
Yeah, it totally depends on, where you are. And this, again, like I said, a lot of females are typically, missing lunch or something like that. So it could be we establish some structure in the beginning and then we phase them out. Like, that is my goal as a dietitian for any client, is that they can know how to make choices and know how to listen to their body in the end. So some people, may be there when they first come and see me, and others may require, like, let's restructure, your day type of thing. So it's something that takes time, and being able to, like, understand what's going on, like, psychologically, like, is this a hunger issue, or is this stress, emotions, like, what else is going on that could be explaining why I want to eat or don't want to eat.
You mentioned the food journal. I really I took a note of that. I like that idea a lot. And it seems like you can almost pair that with maybe a strategy similar to, hey, wait 5 minutes. If you have a cue that you're kind of wrestling, is this hunger? Wait 5 minutes and try again, type of thing.
Yeah, maybe it's going outside with your dog or doing something else, but stepping away, stepping out of the kitchen, and asking yourself, am I truly hungry? Like, do I need this?
Yeah.
So all of this stuff has been pretty individualized at this point, or we need to take individuality into consideration. And I've been trying to not specifically pin you down to anything, but this question, I'll preface by saying I'm intentionally trying to pin you down to a few things here, which is to ask rather, are there any absolutes for everyone? And maybe there's some flexibility in there. For example, maybe something might be, you simply cannot overeat and expect to lose weight. Like, that's an absolute maybe that we could probably agree on. Are there any other things? And the reason why I ask that is because there's so many different people and so many different individuals listening to this. Is there something that every single person can kind of take away? And I think an example, maybe to give you some more time here, is that you need to be in touch with yourself. That's what I'm getting. That's what I've gotten the most of here, is that in order for this thing to actually work, you need to know yourself, to know what you need, what you don't need, and to kind of feel that and mentally and emotionally go through that as well. So
Yep.
are there any other kind of absolutes in it? And it might be that, which is not specifically nutrition, inherently just nutrition based.
Yeah, I would say it is individualized. I mean, that's for sure. But like something that everyone could, potentially benefit from. I'd say protein is an example. Like we tend to backload our protein. You guys are probably well aware of this. So getting more protein at breakfast and lunch is one that I'd say is super beneficial, not only from a satiety standpoint, but also to, from a lean tissue standpoint with aging. And I'd say that's an absolute. Like protein's important. Vegetables are important too. I think more color, we can all do better from a color standpoint. And that might be like making smoothies with kale or spinach, and like where can we get at least 3 servings of veggies. I think that's, and then 2, from a weight loss standpoint, again, not my favorite topic, but I do think Andrew knows this. That is one thing that, people can do, is increase the high water content, low energy foods like fruits and vegetables, and kind of focus on half your plate being fruits and vegetables. So I don't know if that's an absolute for everyone, but I think emphasize veggies, emphasize getting enough protein at each meal.
Which I love, because you're not saying it has to be this kind of protein or it has to be these vegetables. And that's kind of what I'm looking for is I'm not looking for so narrow of a view that it does exclude some of that individuality. But to your point, it seems like protein is key, and then getting some colors in your food is key. And how you do that is going to be dependent on each individual, the access that they have to those things and otherwise. So thank you for letting me get you pinned down on a specific answer. So yeah.
That's okay.
Kelly, what's your view towards supplements? Is this an issue where we say, are you deficient in something? If so, maybe we use that to address it. Is it, are there any universal rules with supplements, or is it just more individually based?
Definitely individual, with some, I guess, caveats, like vitamin D, for example, in the winter months. If you live at a latitude that's above, I think it's 37 degrees north, where we're not able to synthesize vitamin D from the sun, then I think, vitamin D is one. What else? Vitamin D, that's probably my absolute. I mean, if you're eating well. Protein, I'm a fan of protein powder, just being 100% honest with you. I think that a lot of people struggle to get enough protein. And so getting a NSF certified protein would be something that I feel like beneficial for active parents on the go, and potentially athletes. Creatine is one that, really, there's a lot of good research around creatine. A lot of new research, especially for like females who are in their 40s. That might be one to consider.
Can I pause you there? I've heard of some interesting new research with creatine and like things like cognition. What are some of the things that you're hearing with females in the 40s? I'm not sure I'm aware of this.
Same thing with cognition, and then potentially helping like offset some of that loss of lean mass. And I mean, I haven't imbibed yet, but I'm, something I've thought about. And 2, with any supplement, I think the biggest thing is get a third party tested supplement. So
you mentioned NSF. Isn't there one other one that's usually kind of a gold standard?
Yeah, NSF for informed choice with supplements, and then with like vitamins and minerals, it would be the USP.
That's right, USP. Okay. Yeah.
So look for those labels, or have a dietitian look at it for you.
Come talk to Kelly.
Yeah.
Speaking of research, are there some interesting pieces of research or things in the nutrition field that are exciting or interesting to you? Things that are kind of pushing maybe some of the new boundaries, or things that maybe most people aren't aware of yet? What's on the cutting edge, or what's got you excited research wise?
Oh man. I mean, Andrew, I'm completely like focused on sports. So I don't know that it's mainstream nutrition, but I'm super excited about some of the research that's being done with sodium at the moment. I think it's Alan McCubbin, who's in Australia, but he's got some interesting research looking at sodium intake and how that may be better prescribed for athletes. So that, and then of course anything around like relative energy deficiency in sport and energy availability, that's going to be. So again, I feel like I'm pigeonholed into.
That's okay. I'm curious. What's
area.
what are the outcomes with sodium? Is it? I'm assuming it's an increased sodium intake for athletes because of the sweat volume.
No, so he's kind of saying that it's my thought is it's over sensationalized, in that you should only consider sodium in a situation where you're able to replace 70% of your fluid losses. And so he's got this whole algorithm. And then two, he kind of goes and says that it's only important for 3 to 4 hours or more activity. So really? I think it's kind of interesting. So the kidneys do a pretty good job regulating, as long as we're not like pushing too much fluid. So kind of different than what we thought.
So he's almost going the other direction of saying maybe we're consuming too much.
Correct. Like,
you
think, and I'm in the endurance world, and I do think it's important, but it's just fascinating. And I think everyone's got the sweat patches that you can get from some of these companies, and the validity of those questionable. And I think everyone's just kind of gone off the rails about sodium, and that's what causes cramping. And the research clearly doesn't seem to support that idea that it's, sodium depletion. I'm not saying it can't be, but that is not the primary cause of cramping.
Do we have a good idea of what is causing cramping? It seems like it's multifactorial perhaps, but
yeah, I think they allude more to like neuromuscular fatigue. And so if you're in a situation, like let's say you go do a trail run and you haven't trained on hills, you're more likely to cramp. So or maybe it's the duration, or maybe it's the heat. So typically those.
Okay.
So I'm not saying sodium's not important. I just think perhaps we need to rethink how we're
prescribing the amounts.
And you need like liquid IV and all these crazy things that are out there.
Yeah.
And like maybe overhyped. That's what I'm getting at.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Levi.
What are some, on the topic of research and kind of just the history of dietetics and whatnot, what are some things that maybe you were trained in originally that now as research kind of comes out that was gospel, that were those absolute things that maybe someone from, a generation past in this world would say, this is the way, this is the only way? What are some things, what maybe one or two of those things, and then how have they changed maybe over time?
Yeah, one thing is protein, because I do remember teaching, I think it was my first sports nutrition class, and clearly like saying, too much protein could be bad. And obviously, like, I'm not suggesting someone consume 5 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight, but I think we've seen. Yeah, that would be way too much.
That'd be so rough. Oh, to eat that much would just be
the toilet paper bill alone.
Yeah. And you're not enjoying your food. Oh, that would be awful. So, but I've seen a shift in what we consider to be like safe, and also a shift in protein needs. So I know with the athletic population, it was like 1.2 to 1.7 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight. And then I've seen that shift up to 2 grams. And then for those that want to lose weight or maybe are injured, 2.2, maybe even 2.4. So it's not bad for the kidneys unless you've got renal disease, those sort of things. Like you're going to leach calcium out of your bones to try and buffer an acidic state. Like all of that's changed. That'd probably be the biggest one. I can't think of another one at the moment. I'm sure there are.
Yeah. So what would you say to, an athlete that wants the edge, they want to get better, and so they're trying to look at the research, or they're digging into this stuff? What kind of tools do they need to be able to sift through some of this, where to have, you know, some discernment in what they're in what they're adhering to, maybe.
And what they're reading and hearing.
Yeah,
I
like
would say, like Muscle and Fitness magazine is probably not your.
sure.
I'm not saying it's not credible, but there's some good articles, but is it peer reviewed? Are you looking at a .org or .edu site, or is it like coming from Google? The other thing I would say to those athletes too, like wanting the performance edge and, who are maybe considering a supplement, let's say, is your sleep 100%?
Thank you.
Is your training and your diet, all of those things have to be maximized in order for a supplement to maybe give you like a 1% advantage, right?
Right. Do those things well first and then move on to whatever else. Yeah.
It's amazing how much we can get out of the basics, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly.
You mentioned kind of the peer review and the importance of finding good sources of information. And also you mentioned the Ellen Satter book, which I'm excited to take a look at. Are there other books or resources that you would recommend for people who are interested in learning about nutrition or sports nutrition?
Yeah, sports nutrition. I'm gonna suggest Nancy Clark's sports nutrition guidebook. I don't know if you're familiar with her, but she truly is like the guru in sports nutrition. And she has a more recent edition that's out. There's another one that I was reading, like a GI issues and endurance athletes, the athlete's gut. And I cannot think of the author at the moment. That's a great book for endurance athletes that maybe struggle with GI issues.
You mentioned gut. That makes my brain immediately go to this. There's all this talk about kind of the gut-brain axis and the importance of the microflora of your gut. Where do you stand on that? What can you educate us about in terms of the importance of the gut? Is it overstated? Is it important?
No, I think it's important. I think, probiotics and prebiotics are definitely important. So making sure that you're getting that good gut bacteria. And again, definitely not an expert on any of that, but it is something, to think about, like, am I getting kefir and yogurt and kimchi, things like that have probiotics, and then those prebiotic foods that support the probiotic.
It speaks to the importance of that relationship. I mean, we come back to this again, but I mean, that was a lot of those pre and probiotic type foods are foods that take time to prepare, whether it's, kimchi or sourdough bread or what was the one you just made? Cabbage, the fermented cabbage, sauerkraut.
Kimchi. Yeah.
Yeah. And again,
either or, both are good.
Yeah. Either or.
Good. Yeah.
It's all these things that take time, but the benefit of those whole food, colorful sources that benefit the gut and the brain and all these other things. So
the thing is with that is, to me, in our experience, like, our kids love doing that. I mean, you cut up some cabbage and you get your kid sprinkling some salt in there and squeezing it. They have a blast. They love eating, drinking kefir. You got the little kefir grains and you're kind of scooping out and moving those around, and you're filtering through this kefir. And that to me, as you mentioned earlier, is so huge. Yeah. I mean, it's literally like a science experiment for them. And then they have this way better understanding of where their food comes from. And then also you're subconsciously giving them skills and confidence to do this later. Like you said, having 3, 4, 5 meals that they know how to cook. I mean, you go off to college and you're kind of like, I'm free, but to have those things in your back pocket and those in your toolbox is huge.
Exactly. Yeah. I don't know if you have a kimchi pot. Do you have one of the fermented? I forget what they're called. I have one in here. But that's a fun thing for the kids to, like, because you have to
like muddle it and
Yep. And they get into it, and then they get tired, and then you have to take over.
Yeah. But making pizza dough and so like these things that we would traditionally say, maybe not making this a priority dinner or whatever. But if you're making your own pizza dough and then putting your own toppings on it, it might not be the first ideal meal of health, but getting the kids involved, having them play and enjoy and have autonomy, like we talked about, making your own noodles. These things are not the hardest thing ever. Maybe it's not for a Monday through Friday night, but on Saturday or Sunday, that could
Right.
be a family event that you can get everyone involved in. And
Mhm.
those are things that we've used, at least, to get our kids integrated into kind of the food process, also to
Mhm.
enjoy some of these more maybe cheat meal type dinners or lunches or whatever. So yeah, that's a good reminder to make some kimchi
Yeah,
and
I
have some
think
fun.
enjoyment's key. I mean, I think that's the biggest thing with food, and we
Mhm.
forget that. Like, we get focused on what is healthy and what's good for the gut and then the
Yeah.
brain, but like food should also be enjoyed, and
Yeah.
it's a pretty simple message. But I think too, like, you know, through doing those things with your kids, they will enjoy the more wholesome, good for you type foods, you know?
Mhm. And there's conversation that's always to be had either when making the food or eating the food, which
Mhm.
is also something that I think we've touched on as far as just mental health, family, relationships, and so on, is
Mhm.
looking for opportunities. Because when you're, the kids in school for 7 hours and then they're at practice for 2 hours and then you're carpooling, so they're with their
Mhm.
friend in the back and you're not talking with them. I mean, that's 10 hours all of a sudden that you're missing out, plus the 8 hours they're
Totally.
sleeping. There's limited time here. So those are
Yeah.
great ways to have family time for sure.
Yeah, definitely.
Well, Kelly, this has been a lot of fun, really enlightening, and some great
Good.
wisdom from you to us and our listeners. So thank you for that. And I just want to give you a chance to let people know where they can find you and learn more from you.
Yeah, I thank you again. This has been awesome. I am on Instagram as K Pritchett RD. And then I also have two more Instagram pages. One is Inside Sports Nutrition, and
Mhm.
this is with a colleague of mine, Namrita Kumar, who's also a dietitian. But we have put together this Instagram platform really just to get out evidence-based sports nutrition information and debunk some of the myths that are out there. And then finally, our CW Sports Nutrition page, which is kind of developed for our athletes.
Mhm.
And that's it.
That's awesome. I'll be sure to link those in the show notes so people can have easy access to that. But again, Kelly, thank you so much for your time today and for all the great conversation and wisdom. So we just appreciate the time you took to be with us and wish you all the best.
Thanks,
Of
Kelly.
course. Thank you. Have a good weekend.
As always, we appreciate the time you took to listen to this episode, and we want to challenge you to identify one action that you can take from this conversation to implement in your own life today. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider sharing it with someone you might think would benefit. Our goal is to reach more parents and provide tools and practices that will help improve families and communities and their health. So we greatly appreciate your help in getting the word out. Thanks.